Hey guys, I'm Jeff. Welcome to my shop. I wanted to show you a project that I did over the last couple of weeks, and it's this giant spray booth. It's actually not that giant. It's probably a pretty small spray booth, but it works really well in my shop. I built it from pretty commonly accessible materials that were easy to get into small vehicles and based it around a blower that I got from a secondhand store. It's not like a mega horsepower suction machine, but it does help clear out the stinky fumes out of the shop so that I don't have to open up the doors to paint during wintertime. That being said, let's see how it came together.
I started by making a frame out of this 3/4 inch angle iron. I got this pre-cut and then I finished it to my own dimensions. I cut it out to make these joints that I've seen Jimmy DiResta use and a number of other people. I wanted to weld it together because that was the most convenient for me, but you could really build this in a number of different ways. You don't have to have a welder, you don't need to use steel. I hadn't fired up the welder in a little while, so it actually took me a little bit of time to figure out why these welds were coming out so horribly, and come to find out my intern didn't turn the gas bottle on. So I fired them, and then everything went smooth after that. The design of this frame is really pretty simple. It's just a box with no bottom to it. I got these two straps going across the top, and then another couple of pieces of metal across them, and that's going to be where the blower fan itself mounts to. These crossbars on the sides will add some rigidity and be part of the work holding. I used some extra scraps of angle iron to make these feet to screw it down to the tabletop where it'll ultimately reside. And of course, grinder and paint, well, you know the rest. The walls of this box, the top, back, and sides, are made out of just this standard hobby foam core board. In fact, I got this from Hobby Lobby. They carry sheets that are huge, that are actually big enough to make a box out of like this. It's easy to work with, it's inexpensive, it's easy to transport. I thought it would be a really good option. Of course, you could do any kind of panel material you wanted. This isn't the strongest material, but I don't see it taking a lot of damage under normal use, and it doesn't really have to take any load or anything. We'll see, though. I need to make a cavity for the rear of the box. This will hold the air filter, and it'll also be where all the air suction, well, comes and goes from. This is just some 1x4 wood from the big box store. The home for this will be a workbench that's been in the corner of my shop unused for pretty much the entire time I've been in there. It just kind of gathers junk. I need to do something about that. These Craftsman workbenches aren't the heaviest duty. They're okay for light duty stuff, and you can unscrew the top from the sheet metal base, which was really easy in this situation because I could just rotate the whole thing around to work on all sides of the project. With the walls up, I could now focus on the door that'll hold the baffle. This protects the filter. This is just a basic frame with some hinges on it. I used steel, but that's really not necessary. You could use whatever you wanted. I thought about using aluminum or wood, I don't know. I think part of me just wanted the challenge to keep practicing my TIG welding. Obligatory reminder that these hinges are zinc plated, so you don't want to just straight up weld them without good ventilation, and like in my case, I also ground off as much of the zinc as I could. This is just a standard vent cover like you'd find at any big box store for your house. I got this one at the Restore for way less than you'd get it at the big box store. Cutting this recess for the vent adapter is something that probably would have been a lot easier to do before I had it all mounted up in place, and come to find out that, yeah, the new intern didn't put that on my to-do list, so we had to let them go as well. Silly little tip for the day, these little electric screwdrivers that are cheap as hell will actually drive screws into wood through sheet metal, so now you know that. To seal everything up and hold everything in place, I'm using pure silicone. The airbox gets the most attention. I make sure that everything is very well sealed and that the back panel is held on very tightly. It's got a few nails in the back, and then this silicone will really suck it in. Should be plenty strong enough for this application. This actually reminds me of my days as a pastry chef, where I would use a piping bag very much like this caulking gun. Now, the real hero of this rig is going to be this blower you see in the foreground, and I found this at a Habitat for Humanity restore. I found it really inexpensively. You saw the $10 sticker. It's not the biggest one in the world, but it actually works pretty well. I adapted this gas vent adapter. I found this at the big box store, and I was able to cut it down to fit on the side of the blower here, so we get all of our suction going in there. And I was able to drill a couple of holes so I could use some of the existing bolts on the side of the blower. And then everything else, I just used some more silicone, and that sealed it up and held everything tight. This type of blower is pretty crucial to the whole design and how this thing works. The motor is outboard of the fan itself, and that keeps any sparking away from ventilation. Now, I'll admit that I have essentially zero HVAC experience, so I apologize if I'm committing any sins or any cringeworthy behavior to you guys who are in the know. This seems appropriate for the project, though. I happen to have quite a bit of this 4-inch ducting and could find some more of it pretty inexpensively, so that's what I used here. I could have just gone through the wall. That would have been really easy to do, but there's a window really close, so I just made a little panel that fits right into it, and I can just put one of the dryer vent covers into it and just vent everything right out of the window. There's already a couple of pretty good physical barriers on these vents that keep most critters out, but I also added a layer of aluminum screen, like the stuff you use in a screen door, inside of it. That'll keep the wasps out. That's what I'm concerned about. With the ductwork all done, I could now focus on the electrical stuff, so I have this extra LED work light, and it fit in there perfectly. I'm covering it with this standard, this is an adhesive-backed plastic film. It's good for, microwave cooking temperatures, so I figure it'll be fine on this light. I need to wire everything together. The light doesn't have a switch. So I ran everything into this box, and I can control them independently and all in one location. To hold the switches in place on the front cover, all I needed to do was drill a couple of half-inch holes in a plate. But I have a CNC machine, so I did that. I got a little bit greedy with my cutting strategy here. I'm just doing a 2D contour, and the problem is once that center nugget breaks free, yeah, it gets caught and breaks the end mill. Moved the part, too, so I had to re-zero and reprogram the next path. This is an adaptive, and yeah, it works fine. It leaves just a little bit of foil on the bottom. I think that's because the part is being squeezed in the vise. This is a no-name 20,000th ball end mill. I wanted to test it versus the Lakeshore Carbide engraving ball end mill because this one came from Amazon, so it shows up pretty quickly. Otherwise, probably just stick with the Lakeshore. It's always really reassuring when you wire something up and then when you go to test it, all the sparks stay inside where they're supposed to be and they don't escape and hurt you. All the switches worked great, but the blower was sounding a little restricted. It was not making the same noise as it was when I tested it on the Workbench. It was pretty easy to draw the conclusion that my ductwork was just too small in diameter, and luckily it wasn't too difficult to upgrade this. I went and got some of the flexible ducting, and only had to change out a couple of fittings. Everything else was pretty plug and play to switch up to the 6-inch. I had to make a new window panel and get a new vent for that, but hey, that's showbiz. For this maiden test run, I'm specifically not wearing a respirator, and that's, well, so I can tell exactly how well the extraction's working. And it works really well. I will wear a respirator pretty much every time I use it in the future, though. It's funny how bright the light is. It looks so dramatic on camera. It's actually very clear and very easy to see everything inside of the booth. One of the big ideas behind these crossbars on the sides was so I could put a wire between them and, well, hang parts from. The last piece of cheese in this omelet is this little rack I have actually made up years ago. I made this to hold all kinds of shop liquids, oil, paint, everything. Hung it on my wall a couple of shops ago. Happens to fit a spray can perfectly, and it also happens to fit on the side of this workbench perfectly.
Anyway, I'm really pleased with how this thing works. It works nicely. It's definitely not like a dust collector. You're not going to get like heavy particulates sucked up through this thing, but it does remove the odors, the excess paint that's in the air, and basically makes the shop more comfortable when you are painting inside. In fact, it feels really weird to have all the doors closed and to actually spray inside the shop. And it doesn't stink at all. It's kind of nice. So for the kind of stuff that I do in my workshop, this is really handy. There's more modifications and improvements I'm sure one could do based off of this design. I've got this whole station now where I can keep my paints and my painting supplies as best as I can tell, other than maybe some more adjacent lighting if I ever have any shadow issues, which haven't been an issue yet. But if there was anything else to add to this whole station to make it a little bit more complete, it would be to plumb in more airline from my air system. That way I can plug in my paint guns without having to use an extremely long hose stretched across the shop. I think too that it's also worth noting that this removes the odor and gets stuff out of just lingering in the shop, but this isn't a super safe system as far as like it's not removing them from the environment where it's dumping them outside. I've done my best to filter that stuff out, but it's just the same as if I was just out in the driveway spray painting. It's still wise to wear a mask. And of course, when dealing with any kind of paints or solvents or anything of that nature, you have to take as many safety precautions as possible. That's on you. This, however, is just my little convenient painting booth, and so far it's worked out really nicely. Usually for builds like this, I like to put as many of the supplies I used because I get that question a lot. I usually put links for that in the description. I sourced most of the stuff locally from the Habitat for Humanity Restore and then just local big box hardware stores and the big box or whatever you call them, craft stores. The potentially largest expense is probably going to be the blower motor and fan and that whole assembly. Those can be found on eBay. I've looked around. I was looking at some that were in the $40 to $50 range, and you got to be careful because shipping can kill you on that. This one I got for $10 at the Restore. It was basically a flea market for materials and old appliances. So I encourage you to look at flea markets, swap-in shops, the Restore if you have those available to you, any kind of second-hand market. You can find a small blower like this one or an even larger blower. You'll probably find it pretty inexpensively. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out all my other videos if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next video.